皆さんこんばんは、片岡です。よろしくお願いいたします。ヘザウィックスタジオ展共感する建築、今日から開幕いたしました。もともとはですね、2020年の年初に予定をしていた展覧会で、全てクレートも東京に届き、バスを組み立てようかと思っている頃にいよいよコロナが危なくなってきたなというので、トマスがロンドンから飛ぶのか飛ばないのかという最後の決断をして、ただ延期を今するともう空いているのは3年後ということだったので、今回のこのタイミングに至ったわけなんですけれども、いろいろな意味でその間に増えたプロジェクトがあったり、計画中だったものが完成したりと内容的にはより充実したのかなというふうに思っています。そしてスタジオから何人もトーマスだけではなくてスタジオから何人も来てもらって展示もしてもらいましたので、非常に良い機会に結果的にはなったんじゃないかなというふうに思っています。ヘザウィックスタジオは1970年生まれのトーマス・ヘザウィックが94年に一人スタジオとして始めたそうです。で、今は本当にニューヨーク、シンガポール、上海などなど世界各地で大型のプロジェクトを手掛けていて、今回はその中から28件のプロジェクトをご紹介しています。で展覧会は、便宜的にですね6つのセクションから、彼らの仕事を紹介していて、それはそのセクションでなければならないというかっちりしたものというよりも、このヘザウィックスタジオの目指しているもの、あるいはその、中心になっている思想が何なのかということを、知りたいなと思って、その3焦点として6つほど挙げています。なので今日はですねその3焦点をたどりながらいくつかのプロジェクトを紹介してもらって、で本当にそのいろいろなタイプの仕事、そしていろいろな地域での仕事を踏まえてそこに通底しているものが何なのか。でちなみにタイトルは英語では Building Soulfulness というタイトルで、本当にその建築のような大きなスケールに魂を込めることができるのかどうかというような、そういうデザインの問いかけも通底していることの一つかと思いますので、その辺も探っていただければというふうに思います。では対話は英語で進めていきたいと思いますのでよろしくお願いします。So Thomas, thank you for joining me this evening. After he arrived on Monday, so he had been on site and installing and looking after, then having all these interviews. So he's quite exhausted, but this is, and you're flying back tomorrow. So it's quite dedication for him to spend time with us. So I want to start with maybe some of the exhibition section that we can see. The exhibition starts from this vast space, and I like to look at this one. In fact, the exhibition design was also done by Heatherwick Studio, and this banner idea came out of a conversation that he has deep interest in Japanese culture of this noren and curtains. But then I like to see these hands. This is Thomas' hands. And maybe, Thomas, you can talk about how your hands, hands up, are very important.
Don't shoot.
Very important to what you do.
Well, I suppose we sometimes talk about head, hands, heart. And it feels as if buildings and places that we were around when we were, when many centuries ago coming forward, they sort of had maybe a balance of thought as well as a craftsmanship and a sense of connecting with feelings. And then with the advent of modernism, it feels like the thing that got celebrated was the head. And so things moved to a thrill and excitement at the conceptualization and intellectualization, and maybe a contempt for sentimentality, which modernism was an exciting thing to happen. And maybe in the world of paintings and in the world of music, those things don't surround you in your life. So if a painting throws away certain things to do with craft or whatever, you can walk away from a painting. You can put the headphones down with music when it experimented with not being melodious, but with atonal music types, or when Picasso said, let's make women break their face, turn it round, and the ideas that psychoanalysis and Freud were bringing in. But when that thrill of modernism came into buildings, there was I think it took for granted how important making and craft was. And I was brought up around people who made things. And so when I came into the world of buildings, and I just as a child, you're just looking around thinking, why did they build that? Who did that? I had been around people where how things felt and was part of them. And so I suppose in the work we're doing, we're trying to get rebalance head with more hand and more heart somehow, which sounds sentimental and sounds catchy, but it's maybe just a way to explain something that I think I believe to be true, but when you think about the user, and I think when it went to the head, it stopped being about the user, and buildings would win awards from other building designers, not really be winning awards from the public, and winning awards for sustainability because it's highly insulated or because it uses minimum energy, but not true sustainability is when people like something enough to not destroy it in 20 years. And in Tokyo, there's been, I think, the shortest building lifespan in the world for certain decades, where the average life of a commercial building was only 20 years. And so I think that when we talk about things about feelings and emotion and sentimentality, actually it sounds like it's a question of taste and a conversation about, well, that's your taste or my taste. But if the public don't connect and feel cold, then politicians and property developers and everyone will be happy to take it down. And my final thing was just on that, was one of the new office buildings in London, somebody calculated how many McDonald's Big Macs of energy it took, and it was 90 million Big Macs to make it. And if you think of the resources, the greenhouse gas emissions in making 90 million Big Macs, suddenly it's very serious if buildings are only liked by their creators and not by really the public. And so I think in the construction industry there has been a portraying of public as ignorant. And I'm interested in that because this simplification, like the public don't like this modern thing, therefore they are ignorant. But I believe the public, I am ignorant about quantum physics. I don't know how many people in this room know a lot about quantum physics. Maybe there's a few, they're just being shy, he does, okay. But everybody in this room is an expert on buildings because you've lived your whole life in buildings, and whether you studied or not and are sensitized to have language to talk about it, you're all experts at buildings, and everybody, actually you probably all are, but I mean people on the street might not actually be experts technically, but actually we are. And in the UK, it became a really stupid discussion about which involved Prince Charles. And like, if you didn't like modern things, then you must be Prince Charles and you must like only old-fashioned buildings. And then the people who design buildings could laugh at you. But actually, normal people love modern buildings. When you look at the favorite buildings in the world, the top 10, more than half are modern buildings. So it's not true. They just like human buildings. And so in our studio, it's like a research project. We're experimenting, researching, and you have made us show so much stuff.
Yes, which is sample table.
Which is us experimenting with how do you try to make more human-centered buildings and places.
Yeah, I think actually on this sample table, we can look at the record of your trials and errors and all these ideas coming into, but also include a couple works from his student time. And I thought it's interesting for young people to know that you studied material instead of like a discipline.
Well, it seemed funny to me that the world of designing the world around you was chopped up into all these slices. There was something called landscape design, something called interior design, something called sculpture, and something called art. And it goes on and on and on. And I just thought, well, all of that is about the world around you and how it works and how it makes you feel. And it seemed funny to me that the modernist mindset took art out of buildings, but then wanted to put an art piece in front of the building that it had taken the art out of. You thought, well, why do you need this stupid piece of art? Why can't you make the building have the emotion or whatever you think you're doing with that artwork? Why do we need that phenomenon that they call the turd in the plaza sometimes, if you know what I don't know if the translation worked there. I think that where thinking is in the world around you is, so I avoided a conventional training back when I was studying because I could see it was like for the very academic school kids who did the very academic and the wealthier ones, and it didn't feel quite right to me then in the UK. I don't know how things are now here. And so my degree was in three-dimensional design, wood, metal, ceramics, glass, and plastics. And the world is pretty 3D, and most of the world is made out of wood, metal, ceramics, glass, and plastics. And so we experimented. The course encouraged experimentation with different metals, experimentation with glass and stone and wood. And I found that it gives you ideas. Materials give you ideas when you try doing things with them. And when you then think about function and what a material lets you do, I believe there's something a bit deeper you can do. But if you have no experience of making and you're just being conceptual, and it amazed me in the UK, architecture was being taught, and I think it was a global fashion, by people who never had made a piece of furniture, never had put a shelf up, and only did drawings and maybe made a white card model. And no wonder that the buildings being made were sterile and two-dimensional. Because to actually really understand form, you have to experiment trying to really make it. And I found using clay, wet clay, is very good because it doesn't let you be flat. It's very hard to make wet clay be flat. You've got to try really hard. Whereas in that 2D paper way, it's very hard not to be flat. And so buildings looked so flat. And then there was this toxic combination, which is that this style of building in fact, I don't even think it was a style of building. I think it was a taking away of the style of building, was cheaper. And so it was the invention of cheapness, and a bit like processed food, invented cheap, nutritionless food. And so it's taking nutrition out to the point where we now say, but building, if you want to do that, it's very expensive. And it's not, it's just we discovered you could build even cheaper. And we now say, if you're not building cheap, that means it's expensive. And I found research showing that actually it was expensive to build buildings before. It's not true. Labor was a bit more expensive, but you didn't have lorries, cars, cranes, all of those things. But society chose to spend money on making buildings and then made the most sustainable buildings because people care about them enough to not knock them down. And if you survived the exhibition and managed to even listen to the TED talk in the last room, which Mammy insisted we put there, it talks a bit more about the environmental impact. And I suppose my hope is that something that in a way has been in the Japanese psyche and has become mainstream around the world, which is now every middle-aged person in the UK might have heard of kintsugi.
Kintsugi.
It's become very trendy. A bit of gold in a plate like this. But that mindset of saying, what if you don't throw something away if it's old and has damage, but that there's joy in fixing things? And actually, how can we put that mindset to buildings now? But real creativity in fixing or growing, if we need more. And this over-perfection. Again, Japan is the expert at the appreciation, like through wabi-sabi, the enjoyment of just looking at things that are old. And whereas new buildings, I think, are all too perfect, too shiny, too straight. And if any of you are architects and designers, you know about snagging. I don't know if the translator will know how to translate snagging. That thing that when a building is finished, you have to, the designer of the building goes around with a list to check the tolerances and specifications of everything on the building. And so to make the contractor make it exact, so you agree plus or minus 2 millimeters on the glass, plus or minus 3 millimeters on the metal, plus or minus 4 millimeters on the silicon, and then you end up with the contractor going, and there's a list of 2,000 things that they got wrong specification, plus or minus. But a building, does it matter? As long as it's dry and as long as it's waterproof and you can keep it warm or keep it cold, on the pavement, does it really matter? And it's interesting when new team members join, they might not be that experienced at designing yet, but they could snag something to within an inch of its life, a millimeter of its life. And then we think of the places we love, and you go to, say, one of the most loved cities, Venice. Go to Venice, snag Venice. Walls are like this out, they're not straight, stains everywhere. Why can't we invent a new kind of construction which is more loose and actually has shadows and textures? I saw my friend Kengo Kuma-san today, and to me he is a master at texture, and I feel we've spent too much time thinking about shapes, but actually your emotion is very much about the texture. And one of the pieces in the show, and maybe the reason even the mosses and grasses are there, is we've been trying to look at how the feelings are about big objects, buildings as the biggest objects. And the UK pavilion for the World Expo
Yeah, I can show you.
It's pretty quick. Was us experimenting with texture, where we were told that the World Expo was happening. 250 countries were each making an expo pavilion at the same time. And we were told that we all had the piece of land the same size, 100 meters by 60 meters. And we were told that we were going to be given half the budget of the other Western nations. And we were told out of 250 pavilions, there will always be a 3-hour queue, 2-hour, 3, 4-hour queue. And we were told, be in the top 5 out of everybody. So we had to think not about what's our concept, but think, what does it mean to be in the top 5? And that means what is in somebody's heart when they come to an expo? What are they thinking? So with this, there are a number of reasons why this was like it is. You'll notice that our site was 100 meters at the beginning, but we realized if we have half the budget, if we try to spend our budget on a building that is 100 meters long by 60 meters, we'll spread the money so thin that it won't have much to it. But if we, trick, like people who do tricks, they do cards and they do this while they put their hand in your pocket and take your money like this because you're looking there. We realized, why do we need the whole 100 meters to be on the cover of the Japan Times? What if we make the smallest pavilion, we make 1/6 of the site be really memorable, and we decided to make 5/6 of the site forgettable. And I'm really proud of how forgettable the 5/6 was. So strategy is just because you're a designer, choosing where to make something louder or not. But then to be in the top 5, we had to imagine what other people were doing. If you're building in an existing city, you can have a good look at everyone else's buildings and think, how do I complement the other buildings or contrast? But we didn't know. Everybody was designing at the same time. Someone in Japan, someone in Bulgaria, someone in Australia. Like, what should we do? We must be in the top 5. And so we thought, what we have to do is not express ourselves, but guess what everyone else is going to do. So we just thought, we know the trends in architecture. They're actually very familiar. And you look in the magazines, and you look at often young designers who come into our team. If you say, have an idea here, you can predict what they will do because there's sort of trends of what everyone's doing. So what we did was we started by predicting what everyone would do, and then we go, so we're not going to do that. So you move that to one side, and then think, and at that time, a lot of buildings had unusual shapes because people saw Frank Gehry do Bilbao Guggenheim. I think, I'll do an interesting shape. So we just thought, no shape, just texture. Just thought, what is the most extreme texture we could make? And buildings are always so hard. So we thought, what if we could make the softest building? And could we make a building that actually could be like a field of wheat or something? And so that our experiment began really, because we just thought, instead of doing a design with lots of complicated things, could we do one thing that you would remember because you just like, what is what? And we focused on that. And the other reason we made it smaller was because there was a rule at the expo, no pavilion could be taller than 20 meters. Oh. Except the Chinese one, which was 80 meters. But the 20 meters, so there was this glass ceiling across the giant expo site. Now, if you imagine photographs in magazines tend to be these proportions, like this screen, that proportion. Now, we had a 100-meter site. So a 100-meter long building by 20 meters high is this proportion. It's not a good proportion. So if we made our memorable bit only 25 meters wide, 20 meters high, when someone puts it in a magazine, I'm showing you how evil I am now, it will be a bigger photograph. Like, do you mind going back to that other photograph? See? Fits well. So actually, we knew the expo pavilions are marketing for countries. And if you want, and it's a horrible competition. I hate competitions. It's so much nicer to not be where everyone is trying to show off. So how do you show off when everyone's showing off? So it's like a horrible brief. But these were the logics. And the final logic, just to say, was we knew every day there would be 1 million people coming to the expo. 1 million people, the world's most people coming to an expo. And it's impossible to get 1 million people inside one building in one day. So we thought, how can we make everyone who comes to the expo feel, I saw the British Pavilion, even if they couldn't go inside it? And that's why we made the outside be the idea of the inside. And so each one of those hairs has a seed, as you know, maybe on the inside. So we tried to get contrasts. It was the most ridiculous pavilion, like a hairy pavilion is stupid, but then equally on the inside, it was the most biodiverse point in Asia, and the most serious. In one of those seeds might be the reason your grandmother lived for another 15 years, from a medicine that was developed from it, or the crops of one nation. So we were playing contrast, but because we designed it to communicate, people knew before they arrived what it was, and if you didn't go inside, you could still feel you saw an idea. I find it interesting trying to think about the whole process. And so that was how that came about.
I also liked the way that when you start looking at the vast expo site and then coming to UK Pavilion, and then see the pavilion and coming to inside, and you have to look at these tiny seeds. So these little things come together and making a big thing. And that was also quite apparent for this London Olympic Cauldron, that I thought was a beautiful idea to have 204 countries and regions, to each of them have a petal, and then if it comes together, then it becomes a whole cup. So where this idea come from? And it's also bringing together something and then make it bigger.
Well, I think what we try to do with our studio's projects is try to, as you heard earlier, we're always trying to think about people's anticipation and people's expectations. And at an Olympics, it's almost like a religious ceremony. It's like a liturgy. You know, when they do a religious ceremony, the Olympic ceremony is always this thing. And it's a very serious moment when the cauldron is lit at the end of that ceremony, as it then gives permission for the sport to begin. And the thing is that we looked at all the different Olympic cauldrons from 20, 30 years before to analyze all of them. And we saw a funny, strange fact that when you ask someone, you just ask someone, which Olympic cauldron do you remember? People couldn't remember them. They only remembered one. And it was interesting because as a designer, you think everything is about design, you know, about the design and shape, and 1 billion people watch the Olympic cauldron being lit. And then interestingly, 1 billion people forget the design of something after. Why is that? And so we realized that the problem is that people think they're designing an object, but actually they're designing a moment. And the important thing is to imagine the feelings of that moment. And the one cauldron that people of my age, maybe Mammy's age too, remember is the Barcelona Olympic Games. Because in Barcelona in 1992, actually nobody remembers the design of the cauldron, but they remember the moment. Because in that moment, they had an archer come along with a bow, and they lit the arrow, and everyone watched like, huh? What if he misses it? And so everyone's like this. And then everyone's brain is having quite interesting thoughts very quickly. Everyone's thinking he's practiced a lot. But then you're thinking, yeah, but if he's nervous, he still might miss. And then you're thinking, oh, but it's okay because there's probably somebody there to light it if he misses. But then your brain thinks, but what if he shoots the person who's there to light it if he misses? And so there's a little chemistry in your brain. And so we decided to work with that chemistry. And whenever I watch the Olympic opening ceremony, my eye is just like, where is it? Where is it? Like, where is it? There, right. Like, go on. When are you going to light it? So we were also aware that in Beijing, it was the most amazing ceremony. It was bigger. Everything was bigger and more amazing. And we just there thinking, oh, little London, it can't compare with that. And we were told that our cauldron must go on the roof of the stadium and that it already strengthened to take 200 tons of extra weight. But we were thinking and looking, and the Olympic, when you think of a flame and you think of the significance of it, we had been working with some Benedictine monks to help them finish a church that was from the 1960s. And the church was a round church. And so the congregation sit and the monks sit, and the altar is in the middle, and the ceiling is round and the light is round, and the middle, the altar was very small. And we just thought, why, if we put it on the roof, like, it's got to be so big. But where is the most important place when you have a round stadium with a round roof, with round seating, with a round track, with a round infield? Just thought, the center. So first we just thought, center, you can do something smaller. I think I'm obsessed with doing small things. Anyway, because then everyone's focus, like in a way, everything is the cauldron. But then we were worried because Olympic cauldrons are strange things after a games. And I was in Vancouver, and there was a cauldron left from one, and it's there it is. Like, you're not allowed to light it again, and it's sort of sitting there. And we were thinking, what do we do with our cauldron after when pigeons are pooing in it and stuff? Like, what do we do? So we thought it'd be nice if it was gone. And then there's also this thing, which is an Olympics. I don't know what you all feel, but me and my partner from the studio, Neil, who's sitting over there, we are Olympic fans. We love Olympic. He likes it even more than me. He'll go everywhere, buy every ticket, everything. But it's very emotional when you have all these countries coming together and not fighting with each other just for 2 weeks, not quarreling, just to sort of, so there's a symbolism that's something quite beautiful about that coming together. And we just thought, who cares if we think the cauldron should be twisted or square. The shape has no meaning, it's just a shape. So we wondered whether there was actually a symbolism that could be powerful. And so this idea came up of what if we have no cauldron, but each country brings a piece. And those pieces are brought in the athletes' parade. And you're thinking, where's the cauldron? Where's the cauldron? Where's the cauldron? And there's the famous athlete who carries the flag. And then there's the person carrying the name. And there was a child just carrying a piece, like a laptop. And they were put in the middle. And we were thinking, will people guess? Will people guess? Didn't know what people could guess. And then have a moment where all these little flames could come together. And just for 2 weeks, they make one big flame. And then at the end, they could come apart. And those pieces go back across the world. And also the Olympic associations in each country actually don't have much money. In many countries, they're just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 previous Olympians keeping a spirit alive. And we just thought it'd be lovely for people to have a piece of something to symbolize what they're trying to do in their countries. Every time there's Olympics, they have to raise money to try and get athletes to go. So that's how that project really began. And we loved the idea that it would be gone afterwards. But it was a very hard project, actually, technically, because we were told, please design the cauldron, but whatever you do, please could you have no moving parts?
No moving parts.
And we were like, We had no idea then. But when we thought about that, and I guess this is what's important when you're, as a designer, when you're thinking about a brief you get given, is that what we try to do is hear what the brief says it is, but try to understand underneath what's really going on, what the real brief is. And so the brief said, no moving parts. But what that really meant was, in Australia, the cauldron got stuck for 2 minutes in the ceremony. And so what they really mean isn't no moving parts. What they mean is make sure it doesn't go wrong. So that's our brief, is do it and make sure it doesn't go wrong. And so we thought, I think we believe in our studio in worrying. It's good to worry. And if you worry enough, things don't go wrong. And so we worried a lot about it, and we tested it a lot, and we managed to make a project, and it had the most moving parts in the history of all Olympic cauldrons in the end. And we were very lucky to work with very good engineers and makers, but it was very close getting it to work on be okay.
But sure, it was memorable to many people.
And it was actually Neil's wife who led the project.
Oh!
So it was that was a quite emotional journey, and she was brilliant collaborating on that.
But also talking about the things coming together, but also people coming together. So a lot of architecture project that you are making is creating a space not as a sort of shell or vessel as architecture, but more about within the building, you create always the void space that everyone can come together. Mm-hmm. So one very good example is this one. Yeah, maybe we can talk about this.
Yeah, often I think, in life people say it's very good to be positive. I think it's really good to be really negative a lot, but in a positive way. Because a lot of our projects, I hope you're seeing in a way I'm talking, is you're trying to find what you're negative about. Because if you can find what you don't want to do, that can really help you then work out what you as a team do want to do. So often we spend a lot of our time discussing what to not do. And when we were asked to do this university building, we were asked to make the first new building in the campus that was 24 hours. So they wanted you to be able to go here anytime, day or night, in this new building. And we were just very struck that the existing building, which was based on sort of modernism from 1910, 1920, but it was built in 1988 or something, just had miles of corridors with no natural light, polystyrene ceilings, and dead doors. And you just thought, I'm not sure you would even feel really safe to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so we set ourselves the goal to make a corridorless university building. So that was one of the first things we chatted together and decided. And that we then, when thinking about that, we thought, how can we make somewhere that has privacy, but also so you can see everything, but also acknowledge that often learning happens not where it's supposed to happen. So you know how people say often the best conversations at a party don't happen, they happen in the kitchen, not in the main living room or whatever. So we tried to, this was like the fire stairs. We were told, ignore the fire stairs, that's just the fire stairs. And we said, no, the fire stairs is actually, is a place. So we tried to make everywhere a place and make so we were also asked to have, they said to us that they wanted to have learning that was not rigid thinking now that the digital revolution had happened. And so they said to us, no corners. We don't want corners. So we were like, okay, no corners. And so we obeyed them like a good designer does. And so we decided in the end to also try to not have air conditioning in a big atrium, but to see whether we didn't make one building. So instead we've made 12 buildings and the air flows through them. And you see in all these, the green parts between, those are breakout spaces where you can sit, talk, chat. I mean, and because it's a tropical environment, 24 hours a day, we didn't need any doors. So the building has no doors. And so it's just cross ventilation. And we were excited also because the building doesn't have to sell anything. It's not competing against other countries. It's not got shops in it. It doesn't have to make anyone money. It could be raw and rough. It could be stained. So it was very low budget. It was a little bit more than for a car park, but everything we could just accept much rawer finishes. And the flooring, we only had a budget for inexpensive ceramic tiles. And so my studio's project architect just went out because the tiles looked so dead. And he just went down all the streets with all the tile suppliers saying, have you got anything cheap? Have you got anything, what have you got in stock at the back? And he found one place that had this quartzite stones that were the same cheap price as the ceramic ones. And they were full of life. And so they look almost like fish skin going through. But that was just because he went to everybody, and was just so determined to give a humanity instead of a sterility. But he wasn't in with catalogs, he wasn't on the internet, he was just speaking to everyone and trying to excite them to help. And that immediacy we've found is often what can be missing from this detached feeling of procuring buildings rather than making buildings and making things happen. And we try with our team to have a mindset a little bit more like entrepreneur, which is, it's so easy for things to not happen. And it's a big lesson for me was also when I was studying and couldn't believe why new buildings seemed so sterile and inhuman. Then when I started interviewing all the different building designers and contractors, and I discovered how hard it is to make anything, that's when the challenge really hit me. The chances to make something and it be human as well, it's really, really, really hard. So unless you go the extra mile and enthuse people and involve people, everything is stacked against you to do that. You have to be really innovative in your approach to how, not innovative as a designer, but innovative in how to make design ideas happen. So most of our energy is not on the idea, it's the driving it through, listening to why can't it happen? Why can't it happen? Is that a good reason? Oh, that is a good reason. Okay, new idea. Okay, what about that? There's another thing. Oh, too expensive. Right, too expensive. How do you know that? And sometimes people say to us, well, we don't get your budgets. And I always think, well, actually, we don't get enormous budgets on every project we do at all. It's about your determination to make something. And when we are commissioned, all we really need is just passion in the commissioner. And then you're going on a journey and you'll somehow do something. You have to work on that belief. And I think we really believe you can still do special things without needing big budgets to do that.
I think this very strong belief that you have and also whole team has to that which generates positive energy. And it's, as you said, it's very easy to give up something because there's so many difficulties if you try to do something that nobody has seen. And maybe I would assume that this project in New York must have gone through very difficult discussions to make it realized, but it's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. But this is actually one of the first pieces that I thought, wow, this really looks like a sculpture. And it really looks like something came out of your hands. It didn't start from this architectural scale, but it looks really like something you played within your hands. But then, I think it's interesting to hear how this idea came about and how this has gone through the difficulties.
This project came about because of again, starting by thinking, what do we expect? And when you have a public plaza, new big buildings around, you can predict that someone's going to put a sculpture there. And you think, okay, you're going to put a sculpture there. And is it going to be by the person who makes big mirror-polished sculptures, who did that amazing big mirror-polished sculpture over there? Or is it going to be a big rusty sculpture by the guy who does the big rusty sculptures that over there? Yeah, you predict what you expect. And then you think, it's a shame when things are what you predict. I'm always disappointed when you go to a space and think, predictable formula. Even if it's a great thing, it's just, so in a way, in the studio, we've been trying to focus on formulas. And so like with the Olympic cauldron, you see, we tried to see if we could find a different idea rather than a design. And so in a sense, we're trying to work from strategy. And this grew from, in a way, with the client group, the first conversation was really saying, look, you're wealthy developers, we expect you to do this. But actually, it's a shame when people just come in and go, and look at something. Wouldn't it be interesting if people use their bodies and engage with something? And the Highline Park had just been, was in construction and being completed in another section. And that, in a way, was revolutionizing public space in cities. And we just thought, well, what if we don't make, I love this video, it's kind of scary, but was to just focus on what if we make a piece of public space, and if we make a mile, so there's a mile of space, and also that the theatre of seeing each other. I mean, in here, you're all sitting at different levels, and there's a sort of theatricality. And in some good public spaces, people like being seen, seeing others. So often this object is portrayed from the outside, but actually we were designing a room. We designed from the inside outwards. And we're thinking, how could we make an amphitheatre that people could walk on and lift people so you get different views and perspectives of each other? So that's how that project really evolved, and we presented it thinking there is no way this is going to happen. As you can imagine, you would never think that's going to happen. And so, and in England, there is a in religion, there's a thing, someone called Doubting Thomas.
Yes, it's doubting Thomas.
And so, I'm underneath a Doubting Thomas in a way. And so it was just there. And also the image of Americans is that Americans are overly enthusiastic. And they go, yeah, I love it, brilliant. And you think that just means it's okay. And so when the client group said, I love it, and we just thought, you're just being polite and that's American. And then the next meeting, they said, we love it. And then we still thought, you're just being kind. But then after 3 months, we realized, you want to do it? You're serious? And that was, so then it really began. And as you can imagine, it's quite an extraordinary thing to engineer, to make. And so it was a surprise to us that it happened. But these were some of the development experiments. As you can see, we were making an amphitheatre, but our problem with the amphitheatre was, as you can see here, we didn't want to turn our back on space around. So we wanted the energy of people seeing up and around, promenading round, but we didn't want to just be a shadow. And so the breakthrough for us was when one of the team suddenly produced an image of the Indian stepwells in Rajasthan, where the ground was dug down with these steps that go down and down and down. And it's a cooling device for an area as well as a way of storing water. And there have been thousands of them built in India over the centuries. And actually, I think now someone is even building one new one now, but many of them need repair. But they go down into the ground. But there was this, like a textile rhythm of the steps. And it's just seemed, well, could we, one, it would be interesting to make an elevator that curves. Could we make an elevator that curves so that people who can't do steps so easily could go on a curving elevator? And then could we make these 2,500 steps and make over 80 spaces where you could stand and chat and go on a date and all of those kinds of things? And so that was the thinking. But that rhythm allowed us to cut out from the amphitheatre so that it would be porous. But we've had a lot of people talk and imagine we were focusing from the outside, but it's not until you go inside that you see really what the idea was. It's a room. And in a way, I think the key issue that I think we're passionate about is public space, the bit of the world that you share around you, and the formats. And is public space just a place with benches and artworks and nice plants? Or what is recreation? And is recreation and generosity, now that we don't need to all live in cities because you can work on video conferencing, now that you can stay at home, not even go to work, now that you don't need to shop because everything can be delivered to you, public space, public life matters a lot. And it feels, I think we're interested in the sort of social justice of public space, that it is something that we all experience. And even if we're designing an apartment project where the apartments themselves are high-end apartments, our passion is that one of those apartments might have in 20 years 1,000 different people go in and out. Say, oh, nice apartment. But in 20 years, 300 million people might experience that as part of their world. So I just feel that we have had an impoverishment where, for business reasons and a big fashion in the way we thought about buildings, we tried to think that the outsides mattered less than they do, and actually they are the landscape of our lives. And now that the way we live is shifting, designing the rooms that we share together, because I don't want to be in a place that's only wealthier people. The best places are full of people of every economic background, and that's our passion, to try to be there. Hudson Yards is a bit of an extreme because that's one of the most high-end parts of New York, but it is free and everyone can come there. And so we try to work with any project that we're offered to try to be focused on what it can offer. And so with the Azabudai Hills project, actually this project is a street. It's not really a building. It's a street and a collection of experiences. And I feel we've borrowed so much of what's there already. Already there were 2 temples, and there's a new temple that's been built there. And then there's the layers of all the existing other buildings. And so we've had the chance to build a number of new pieces and layers, but to deliberately not make a simple thing, to make complexity. And I think the places that we most like going to aren't actually simple, they're complex. And if you think about what people are inspired and get feelings of awe about, often it's the sea or fire or tree, the movement of tree branches on view. It's complexity. And I feel we've had a time of impoverishment of the necessary complexity to feed our minds and our mental health somehow in places. And hopefully by making buildings and places and streets and the landscape around us have more for our imaginations to connect with, we can make places that will be worth adapting and adjusting and repairing and kintsugifying as the years and decades go on.
It's Azabudai Hills is going to be studio's first project in Japan and opening in later this year in November. And detail hasn't really been announced as the press announcement, but there will be 3 tall buildings, and lower level had been designed by Heatherwick Studio. So as Thomas said, that it's very unusual shape of the land, and 3 tall buildings are being connected with what they have done. But you can already look down a little bit from a viewing deck. That's just part of it. The 2 buildings are being built, so there's the part of, like this part is being built so that you can see between 2 buildings.
And and it's on a slope, so you can walk into the slope, you can walk onto the slope. That we've then lifted buildings so you can walk up onto the roofs of buildings and through. So I think it should be a good place to explore, and then you keep finding temples around. And so in a way it's borrowing lots of what's around. And there's also a new school that we've built and a canopy, and then there's collaborations with other architects in different parts. And so...
and also more than 100 kinds of plants.
Hundreds and hundreds of plants. But I must say that the Mori building have really been our collaborator. And I worry that me sitting here makes it seem as if I'm the guy with all the answers. And that's really not how we work in the studio. When I was at college, I thought there was something wrong with me because I imagined that there were these amazing designers and they would sit there going, it should be like this. And then everyone else makes that happen. And I thought there was something wrong with me that I'm stuck. But it came alive for me when I worked with other people. There was an engineer who came into my university. And when you talked to him, straight away, ideas started happening and you would find yourself engineering, him leading concept, and things would grow from those conversations. And in a way, the studio has grown my disability, that I wasn't a genius who just sat there and go, ding, but actually grew, has meant that we have grown together with Neil and the other partners and the project leaders and team members, some others of whom are here today, in a way, a system of working together to explore. And the reason I'm saying this is because also this push and pull and conversation, it's hearing, listening, knowing when, and a big conversation the whole time. And so with Mori, it was interesting to learn also that Minoru Mori was a disruptor. And in a way, he began his business he was studying psychology and French, I think.
French literature.
And French literature. And then he would just thought, why are cities so bad? Why are new cities so bad? Why? So starting with the negative. And the negative can be the most inspiring thing because it feels like a problem to solve, a gap to find. And so the team that we worked with were also pushing us. And initially, and I say this just to try and break you, as I feel have had to get broken, because it's too easy for designers to try and make one big perfect vision. And we originally designed this. We were looking at, there was going to be this one system that would make everything. And actually, we then, through the conversations with Mori, have ended up not with one pure system. It's a system of other elements that all interrupt and disrupt each other. And actually that extra complexity was because of the conversation together. And if any of you are designers and architects, I suppose I urge you to let yourself be disrupted as well. And make sure you disrupt when you build. To not be too perfect. And I think that we are excited in that this project is complex, and we couldn't afford to do everything we wanted to do, but actually we've been able to do the most human dimensions of it, which is what we're really interested in.
And then also in the exhibition, we have a piece of concrete that will be covering like these parts. So once the project is being built, then you can come and touch the surface and how intricately they thought about the making texture and making everything so three-dimensional. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is, they have done, you have done quite a few renovation projects in a way that not designing something from scratch, but giving this building forgotten or have some problem, and then start giving a new life to that building. So maybe you can talk about this one.
Well, I think the great thing about working with older structures is you're instantly disrupted. You can't do anything, if you embrace that challenge. And we had the choice to demolish this building. And it seemed, when we had such a small budget to make a project work, it was a modest budget, and there was no national money going into this. There were no big philanthropists throwing lots of money at it. So we needed to be very focused. And this used to be a grain silo, one of the biggest in Africa, where the grain of South Africa all was stored and then transported out to the rest of the world. And the building was already unusual. And I suppose in our projects, we're just trying to make things that will connect and maybe trigger some thoughts. And there was a truth to this building that was built during apartheid that stopped being used at the end of the apartheid era. And if you knock it down, as well as triggering huge amounts of greenhouse gases to be involved in the demolition and rebuilding, you also take away history, and it feels like history matters to our memory and to create stories. And in Singapore, we were talking with the head planner in Singapore about the problem that can exist with so many new buildings. And the head planner, she just said, all the new buildings don't have stories. And I think there's this need, for us all, humans work around stories. And we felt there was a building already with story. And so, but the nice thing, when people are thinking demolish, suddenly you're free to really think what would be the best thing to do with that, instead of the over-respect. And I think one thing that has existed in the United Kingdom and Europe we've seen is sometimes too much respect. And any extension of an old building is always a glass box. And you're like, oh, is it a glass box? Again. And it just, so again, cliches and trends that are typical. So we started by trying to work out what to not do. And if we knocked it down and you go, hey, there's a new museum, Africa's first new African art museum, and it's like a spaceship sitting in the water. And you just thought, most people when we did our research in South Africa have never been, in fact, in the whole of Africa, have never been to any museum in their life at all. So the danger of making the outside like, wow, what's the risk? Our problem is how do we make someone have the confidence to feel that it could be a place for them to go inside? And if we built the shiny spaceship, somebody could stand outside, take a picture of themselves and the spaceship, go home and say they went to the museum. So the problem we gave ourselves was the threshold. That how do we make someone overcome that kind of, this is a place for other people, but to think this is a place for me. And so we thought, normally the emphasis of architecture can sometimes be outsides, like shiny outsides. And we thought, what if we make the compellingness not be the outside, but make something, the most compelling thing be the inside? Because if it's inside, then you can't say you've been unless you've been inside. And once you're inside, no problem. Curiosity will make you go and look in the galleries because you've overcome your maybe anxiety about that. And so we were thinking, and we were trying to work out what we could do, and just thought, how can we keep these tubes that are so spectacular? But then the curator said, no round galleries. Round galleries are rubbish for showing art. And so we're like, but the round is what is very memorable about the building. And so they wanted 80 rectangular galleries.
80?
80, yeah. So it's like a lot of galleries. And so in the end, we just thought, then if we can make a heart where everyone doesn't get lost, it can be how you know there's a basement level, how you can find your way around. And so we thought, what if we cut through the tubular ones? That might be a way we could keep them. And we got one of the grains of corn that had been stored in the building, and we digitally scanned it, and we enlarged that to being 10 stories high in our computer, and thought, what would happen if we cut that out of the heart? It's a sort of wonky shape. And in the 90 years that this was working, trillions of wonky grain shapes of corn went through that building. But we liked the idea that one of them won the wonky lottery grain competition and became world famous. And we got that shape and we cut it out of the heart, 10 stories high, out of the center of it. And that meant we've just put the spiral staircase in one of those, like a drill bit that had drilled it. And the elevator could be moved in the same way that corn had moved up and down in the building. And we just took the horrible paint off the outside of the building that was magnolia, and underneath the concrete wasn't cold and grey, it was warm. And so this opened 5 years ago, and it was just a very exciting chance to try to think how we could respect heritage, we hope most, but by engaging with the kind of energy that created infrastructure like this originally, rather than being scared and always just making everything a glass box.
It's really amazing to see how memorable all the space or encounter with the space becomes. But also, one of the things I really liked about seeing a lot of projects from the studio was some of the furnitures or design objects has such a sort of humorous playfulness then that kind of playfulness was something that makes you smile, is undercurrent in other architecture projects.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this span and then also expanding furnitures, it really looks like it's starting from a children's toy, but coming to the products. So these ideas, maybe you come from, again, touching something or talking with your colleagues, or what was the request from the client, or how did it come about?
I'm very happy that you describe them as playful. I'm in a way, they begin often as an experiment, and that's quite a serious experiment in a way. And like the spun chair came about because we met a man who did the metal that for timpani drums. You know, in an orchestra, they have the big copper drum at the back of the orchestra. And it seemed amazing to us that they got a flat piece of metal, a circle of metal, and spun it, huge piece, and with the body leaning, pushed with these paddles as it's turning onto a wooden former, and it became this shape. Okay. And but it's the size of a body, it was the size of furniture, and so we're trying to think, chairs, there have been so many chair designs, but was there a single geometry you could use to make a chair where it was a rotational geometry? So it was a sort of, I guess, a nerdy kind of, can you make a single geometry for a chair? And could the bit you sit on be able to rotate? And could the bit that you sit on be your back, the back be the seat, the side be the thing? And that was, in a way, very serious thought, and didn't think that it could do this. Was just thinking, yeah, maybe it could be like a little rocking chair. And then we made in our workshop experiments using plasticine, a kind of Play-Doh. You saw some and wood. And then we discovered it did this thing. So that was like a happy accident. And I remember the first time I was in it, I was like, what's going on? Now I'm an expert. But it was a happy accident. It appears that we were trying to make a toy for fun. We weren't. It was a very serious experiment of geometry, actually. And happy accident turned into seeming like our job was to make a fun toy. And but it's sort of trying to push ideas to a limit and test where the edges of ideas are. And I think that can work at a smaller scale. We are working at the moment on a building, seeing if you can spin a building. You know, whether you can make a building that's spun a geometry. And so it can take a long time. Also, it's important to say, as I was saying, you just listening and disrupting each other. These projects don't happen quickly. I'm a bit embarrassed because I wish I could tell you we did this in an afternoon. We didn't. It took about a year. And so it's not efficient. And it's purely, in a way, it's just taking ideas for a walk, seeing what's the limit of something and is something possible, and being curious about. But it started from a craft technique, and that's why the first ones we made were made from copper and stainless steel and brass, and very expensive to make. And then we were so happy when we had been working with an Italian furniture manufacturer called Magis, and we again, it's important to say how hard good projects are to do. We had been giving that manufacturer ideas for 2 years, 3 years, and they were like, and we were thinking, and then we sent them the pictures of the metal one, and within 10 days, the tooling was being made, it was happening, and it was like the difference between ideas and an idea that kind of connects with people and really can be manufactured is a different thing. I think product design is really hard to get a really good product. And it was an interesting lesson to us. So you kind of listening and trying to understand why did they say about the other ones and yeah on that. What is it? What are those factors? And trying to learn.
Yeah, I think always that kind of attitude of listening to other voices, and then that becomes similar to your new ideas.
And this is actually made in a spun way. The mold goes together, and the granules of the plastic go in, and then it is spun so that they coat the inside of the metal mold, and then it comes apart and pops out. So it actually goes with the technique as well as the form. But it was influenced by vinyl records. You know, the way the vinyl records have all those lines that catch the light and look so beautiful. In a way that we put those lines so it was non-slip, but also to try to give more texture and value. So back to texture of building, texture of seat.
Yeah, actually in the exhibition we have 8 span chairs you can actually experience. And as Thomas said, it's when you start, like first time sit on it, it's really like going around, like started roar, but then it will never. It's very safe. And I think it's exciting experience actually, sit on it and then try to go around.
It was nice watching Mrs. Mori going round in one the other day.
Yes, she was saying to other people, this is very safe, I did 3 round. Anyway, I think it's a good time to get some questions from you. We have 12 minutes, but I think by hearing how Thomas speaks about different projects and also philosophy, how determined he is to overcome these different problems. And making exhibition is also about problem solving. But it's not the problem, because I wanted to see something I have never seen. And architecture you have never seen. And so it's quite exciting experience of seeing the exhibition, but also hearing the ideas behind and how they kind of gone through the different questions and obstacles. But it gives us such a positive energy.
Great.
If someone has gone through all that questions and difficulties, but then many things have been realized. So, any questions?
いかがでしょうか。
あげようとしてます。
あ、じゃあ前から2列目の方。
真ん中の金髪の方。
ありがとうございました。昨日オープニング買わせていただいて見させていただいた時にすごいかっこいい建築がいっぱいあって僕自身もすごいビッグファンになったので聞きたいのがどういう形とかっていうのをどういうふうなプロセスを経てこうディサイドしていくのか、やっぱりこうリアルにこうしないとやっぱり建築家っていうのはいけないと思うんですけど、僕も建築家やっててでヘザウィックさんのはどれもかっこいいのでどういう形を経てこうかっこいいものを世の中に出していくのかで、またクライアントっていうのが必ずしもこうなかなかこうかっこいいからアグリーしてくれるわけではないと思うんですけど、どういう形でそのクライアントもそう巻き込んでそのプロジェクトをこう進めていくのかっていうのを教えていただければと思います。
That's a great question, really great question. I think that in our experience, the client isn't your adversary to persuade of your idea. And architecture costs so much money. Nobody is just going to go, oh, you seem all right. Okay, I'm not quite sure, but here's some money and let's go. Our experience is that it's not like commissioning art where they go, well, whatever the artist wants. It's a big journey. And actually, in the studio, we talk about it's like you're getting married on a project. And it's like, what is the definition of a good marriage? and that means you're going together, and you have to really communicate with each other on the way, and be very honest with each other, and not see the other person that you sort of sell to, but instead somebody who, if they're really going to trust you, you've got to really try to understand, put yourself in their shoes. And I think so often, actually, the building design world treats the clients as if they're ignorant. Starts with the kind of, well, I've been through this education, you haven't, I know that, and what do you know? And it's very adversarial. And actually, many of the clients we work with are actually quite disillusioned with working with building designers quite often, you feel. And so it means it's quite a big commitment for them, because there will always be an easier way. And so if you're going to work on something, you're going to go a longer way together. Even if the budget is low, you've still got to go on a longer journey. There is no shortcut for doing a proper journey together. And so I think a lot of the time, there's a lot of time spent thinking about how to communicate worries well, how to communicate opportunities, how to communicate the things we should think about together, you and your wife, design wife, and you can't walk away later as well, because you're married, you're together, you're doing this thing till the end, till death do us part, if you know what I mean. And so, yeah, I mean, people like Neil is a real master at working with the team and helping them think, not demonize the client, but think of them as like real good questions. They're going to ask you good questions. And so you've got to really give huge benefit of the doubt. And in a way, you've got to convince each other to go away. And often, good ideas happen because of what they say. And I find often there's too much arrogance on the part of the designers to think that they have all the good ideas. And our best projects, it's like with the Mori project, it's better and richer and will be a better place to experience because we were pushing against each other and we respected the comments, input, worries that were there. But it takes a while to overcome manners and politeness. And the problem happens sometimes when somebody treats you as if you have all the answers. You're thinking, no, I don't. No. We're doing this together. Don't think just because you went to my exhibition, that happened because we work together, because we're married, remember? And so I think that mindset of treating, and the same actually with the people who build it. You're marrying them as well. And then the same with the city government who've got giving permission. When they say, no, I mean, I don't know what your planning processes are compared exactly to British, but it's the city planners represent the public. But for some reason in the UK, the design profession treats them as if they're ignorant and to be beaten. You beat them, you persuade them. I'm going to persuade you. And then when a publication is reporting, they'll say that the famous building designer won planning. And you think, won? Did somebody lose? Because actually the planner's job is to represent all of us. And so actually it should be win-win. And we have one of the main projects in the, well, a number, but there's the Coal Drops Yard project with the roofs that do this. Next to, in the exhibition, next to the model of what we built are the models of the other ideas we were having. And we had other ideas first that we thought were brilliant. We thought, this is great. And originally, with this roof was going to go over and bend and become the other roof. So it was going to go, and then the other one was, and we thought, brilliant. And we found the original stone, and the roofs needed major repair. And then the planner and we presented it like, It's good. And the main urban designer for the council just looked and kind of went, and then we after, and didn't say yes, said no. And we went away thinking, and it's typical, human nature is teams are terrible. Teams always think they're right and think that everyone else is ignorant and wrong. I'm sure curators do that as well. And they go, the artists are the idiots. And the artists go, the curators, the idiots. And the builders say the builders, the idiots. And they go, the idiot. Everyone thinks everyone else is an idiot. And so the team started that same kind of, idiots, for our brilliant idea. But then we had a conversation and then said, well, what did he actually say? And he said, there's 2 buildings and you are making them into one. How could you respect them being 2 instead of just go together? And so we had a conversation with the team and said, what if, obviously the planner is an idiot, but let's play a game called The Planner's Not an Idiot. And in that game, let's imagine he had a point. What would we do? And so we, in order to move our brain forward and not be sort of disappointed, and so then we did lots of tests, and you saw some of them are in the exhibition, and then we tried to find the simplest version, and we did this where instead of going from there to there, we just made the roofs come together and come back. And actually, I believe we did a better project. And it was lovely. That planner is now one of the best friends of our studio. And his daughter came to our studio with him, and he's helping us with a book we're writing, and he taught us some of that importance of, and I love telling the story because everyone loves to hate planners. And I'm sure some are idiots, and many designers are idiots, and many curators are idiots, but there are actually many people aren't actually idiots, and most people aren't. And as long as you give the benefit of the doubt that most people are not, and actually if you try to understand each other, maybe we would have world peace if everybody thought like that. We wish in Ukraine, and anyway, I won't go there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the discussion is needed all the time, and whoever your partner is, that I think talk through this exhibition is also, we talk through so many up and down and hilly and mountains, but the group discussion is always helping. And I totally echo what you said. Unfortunately, I think we need to close the session, but I hope our short discussion or Thomas' talk delivered his soul, and you received some of the warmness of his heart. And I hope you can also enjoy looking at the exhibition once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mami. Thank you. Thank you.